My stepfather framed me for cheating on my fiancée so that his own son could have hair, and in doing so, he completely destroyed my life. But years later, the truth finally came out. When I was 15, my father passed away. By that time, he and my mother weren't particularly close anymore, so while his death hit me hard, she didn't seem as affected as one might expect. At 17, I enlisted in the army, and during my first year away, my mother remarried. Her new husband and I never really got along. We were just too different. He had a habit of making sarcastic remarks and telling me to man up whenever I complained about something. This led to frequent arguments, and though I wasn't any less at fault than he was, things never escalated beyond that. After nearly 5 years of service, I was discharged due to health issues. When I returned, my mom and stepfather welcomed me back, saying I could stay with them temporarily. I reassured them it would only be until I found a job and got on my feet. I even offered to pay rent, but they declined. 3 days later, when we were alone, my stepfather suddenly asked me how much I thought a fair rent would be. I was caught off guard, but it was his house, so we agreed on an amount. I never mentioned it to my mom, assuming he didn't want her to know, especially since he never brought up the payments in front of her. I never asked them for anything because I wanted to handle things on my own. My stepfather had a son from a previous marriage. We didn't share any interests, but we had no issues either. I'd even say we got along fine. The only thing that stung was how much my mom and stepfather supported him. They covered his college tuition, bought him a car, and paid for his housing, even after he graduated. I was only a few months older than him, so he had started college right after their wedding. I didn't need their help, but it still felt unfair that he got everything handed to him while I was asked for rent the moment I walked through the door. Still, I didn't hold a grudge. I moved out after 3 months, and soon met a girl who completely swept me off my feet. We started dating, and for the first time, I felt genuinely happy. You know that intoxicating feeling at the start of a relationship, where everything feels perfect and exhilarating? That was us. I was nervous to introduce her to my mom. We were close, and I worried she'd be overly critical, but my fears were misplaced. They hit it off right away. My girlfriend had almost no family to speak of, long story, so my mom and stepfather became like parental figures to her. My mom, especially, took her under her wing. They spent time together, sometimes even without me, which made me incredibly happy. Even my stepfather adored her, and strangely, that brought us a little closer. For the first time, I felt like maybe he and I could actually have some sort of bond. He had grown up without a father. His dad had abandoned them when he was young, so he had worked his way through life on his own, got into college, and landed a well-paying job. I respected him for that. About a year into the relationship, I knew I wanted to marry her. When I told my mom and stepfather, they were genuinely happy. She already felt like part of the family. My mom even gave me her old engagement ring, the one my dad had given her. I wasn't making much money at the time, so I figured it would be a perfect placeholder until I could afford something better. But when I proposed, my girlfriend told me she loved the ring and never wanted another one. I had never felt happier in my life. We started planning the wedding, and for the first time ever, my mom and stepfather offered to help me financially. That meant a lot. Then, about 3 months later, my stepfather called and said I needed to come over. Something about his tone felt off, but after work, I went. When I arrived, my mom, stepfather, stepbrother, and my fiancée were all there. She was sitting on the couch, eyes red from crying. My stomach dropped. I immediately thought someone had died. I rushed to sit next to her, but my stepfather stopped me. Then he started hurling accusations at me, claiming I had been cheating on my fiancée throughout our relationship. I was completely blindsided. I told them all that I hadn't even texted another woman unless she was a relative. Apparently, some girl had gotten my fiancée's number and told her we had been sleeping together for over a year. She didn't even know I was in a relationship. She sent screenshots of our supposed conversations and shared details about me that a random stranger wouldn't know. I stood there like an idiot, trying to process what was happening. I begged my fiancée to look at my phone, to check for herself that I had done nothing wrong, but she just sat there crying. My mom was crying too. I felt my own chest tighten. My stepfather called me every name he could think of, and then kicked me out, threatening to call the police if I ever set foot on his property again. Over the next few weeks, I desperately tried to reach my fiancée. Calls, texts, voice messages, nothing. She never responded. Then, one day, my stepfather called me. Not him. He told me to stop trying to contact her, and that I was no longer welcome in his house or their family. Just like that, I lost everything. I had been trying to reach my mom the whole time, but she never answered. About a month later, the only thing I got was a single message from her, just one sentence about how sad and disappointed she was. My mom didn't have much family of her own, so she spent every holiday with my stepfather's side. They all turned their backs on me too. I saw their Christmas photos on Facebook. Everyone happy, my ex-fiancé smiling like nothing had ever happened. It crushed me. The only people who still spoke to me were my dad's brother and his family, though even they seemed hesitant. The only person I think truly believed me was my uncle. Honestly, I don't know how I would have made it through without him. I had never been more grateful to anyone. About 6 months after everything, I packed up and moved to California, trying to escape the wreckage of my past. A year later, I got a call from an old number from my home state, something that rarely happened anymore. I picked up. It was my stepbrother. I immediately hung up. He called again. I ignored it. But the whole day, it ate at me. Something about it didn't sit right. I decided if he called again, I'd answer. He did. Later that night, the conversation was, to put it lightly, awkward. He told me my ex had been depressed for a long time, taking nearly a year to even consider dating again. Meanwhile, I hadn't been with anyone at all. Then, a few months ago, my stepfather started pushing him to ask her out. Eventually, he caved, and they went on a few dates. Nothing really came of it. When he told my stepfather it wasn't working out, the man simply replied, "I didn't go through all that trouble getting rid of your brother for nothing. She's a great girl, you need to make it work." I nearly collapsed when I heard that. The shock quickly gave way to anger. Turns out, my stepfather had set the whole thing up. I still don't know who she was, but he had found some woman to pretend to be my mistress, had fake screenshots made, and gave her all the information she needed to make the lie believable. My stepbrother said his dad had admitted this to him about a month ago. It had eaten away at him until he couldn't keep it in anymore. So he called me first, told me everything, and said he was planning to speak to my mom and my ex the next day. He wanted me to know beforehand in case they reached out. I told him where I lived, but asked him to give me some time before they contacted me. I needed to process this. That was last Tuesday. This morning, I texted my stepbrother and told him I was ready to talk if they wanted to. They could call me tomorrow. I have no idea what I'm going to say, or what they will. Honestly, I expect a lot of tears and apologies. I don't know if I can forgive any of them. The only person I've told about all of this is my uncle, and I asked him not to tell anyone. Update number 1. 4 days have passed. This morning, my stepbrother called and told me what had happened in the past week. Turns out, my stepfather had been very careful with his words when he confessed to him. He never outright admitted to framing me, just strongly implied it. Enough that my stepbrother knew the truth, but not enough to incriminate himself if anyone asked. Here's what I learned about my stepbrother. He's a lot smarter than me. Instead of running straight to my mom and my ex to tell them what happened or confronting his father, did something I wouldn't have even thought of. Somehow, he got access to my ex's old phone and found the woman who had framed me. He said it took him ages to track her down. Then, he called her, convinced her to meet him somewhere public. And that's when it all unraveled. Turns out, my stepfather met this woman on Tinder, which obviously means he was cheating on my mom. That alone made my blood boil. The woman swore they never slept together, but whether that's true or not doesn't even matter to me anymore. What does matter is that my stepbrother pressured her into telling the truth. He laid everything out: the destruction she had helped cause, the lives she had ruined. For the record, she knew what she was doing. Maybe time and guilt had finally gotten to her. Maybe she just wanted to get it off her chest. I don't care. She admitted she had been paid $1,000 for a single phone call. That was the deal. She was given a script of what to say, fake screenshots to send, and a story to stick to. Then, she made the call. That was it. My stepbrother convinced her to tell the truth to my mom and ex-fiancé. He even offered to pay her again to do it. She refused, said she'd do it for free. That conversation happened yesterday. My stepfather was away on a business trip until Wednesday, so the only people there were my mom, my ex, my stepbrother, and the woman who had destroyed my life. She sat them down and told them everything. My stepbrother told me that the moment the truth came out, the tears started almost immediately from all three of them. After the conversation, he told them I was in California and that he'd talk to me when I was ready. That was before I had even texted him. Now, let me give you some context about my mom and my ex-fiancé No as an excuse for what they did, but to help make sense of why they believed the lie so easily. After my father died, my mom and I were inseparable. We were all we had. When I was 16, I picked up some bad habits, trying to numb everything I was feeling. I had promised her we'd spend New Year's Eve together, but instead, I got wasted with friends and left her alone that night. She sent me a message saying how sad and lonely she felt, and after that, things were never quite the same between us. I felt like absolute shit about it. From that moment on, I tried to be better for her, for myself until my life fell apart again. My mom is the kind of person who needs someone by her side. She can't handle being alone. I think when her love for my dad faded, I filled that void, and when I left home, my stepfather filled it. As for my ex, like I said before, she had almost no family. That gave her serious trust issues, and her past relationships, some of which were far from healthy, only made things worse. Despite that, she never spoke badly about her exes, which I respected. The only exception was one guy who had been abusive. I was always painfully shy, and I'd often hear people call me sweet, especially younger girls. I never liked that word. It didn't feel masculine, but over time, I learned to accept it, even appreciate it. My boyish face, the way I blushed easily, became part of me. My ex was almost 3 years older than me. I had always preferred older women, never paying much attention to 18 or 20-year-olds, even when they showed interest. That frustrated her sometimes. She'd ask why I wasn't into younger girls or why I didn't leave her for someone prettier. But to me, she was incredibly beautiful, more than I ever saw myself as, and I made sure she knew it. I constantly reassured her that I only wanted her. I hope this gives some insight into why they reacted the way they did. Not to justify it. I still don't understand it. But it might explain why they believed the lie so quickly. At the end of my call with my stepbrother, he said my mom and ex wanted to talk to me today. I agreed. So I sat there and waited. By 3 p.m., I started feeling uneasy. A thought crept into my head. What if he made this all up just to mess with me? Then I got a text from my stepbrother. Hey, you good? I replied, yeah. Are they even planning to call? He answered that they had been trying to reach me for hours. That's when I remembered. I had blocked both of them when I left, and I had completely forgotten about it. I don't know why I never blocked my stepbrother too. Maybe deep down I didn't want to, and now I'm glad I didn't. I unblocked their numbers. About 10 minutes later, my mom called. The first thing she said was, "You sound different." I almost hung up right then. It took everything in me to just say, yeah. She immediately started sobbing. I thought I would feel something more. I'd be lying if I said I felt nothing, but the weight of everything that had happened overshadowed it. She asked if I got her messages. I told her no. Apparently, she had been texting me all year, but since her number was blocked, I never saw any of them. The thing is, if she really wanted to reach me, she would have found a way. Maybe that sounds harsh, but I know it's true. I told her, flat out, that I was willing to try to rebuild something between us, but it would take time. She was overjoyed. She also told me she was packing up her things before my stepfather got back, and that she was filing for divorce immediately. I believe her. She might not have been a great mother in my eyes, but she never did anything half-heartedly. I'd pay money to see that bastard's face when he comes home to an empty house. Then my ex got on the phone. Her apologies were just as tearful as my mom's. With her, I felt more. I even tried to remind her how many times I told her I would never do anything like that to her, how much I had loved her. She was horrified, and honestly, that gave me a sense of satisfaction. We talked for about half an hour. It was a good conversation. I had told myself for a whole year that I would never go through this again. But now, for the first time, I wondered if maybe just Maver was still a chance for us. Then she said something that snapped me back to reality. She still had the ring, That pissed me off. I told her to give it back to my mom because it didn't belong to either of us anymore. I could tell that crushed her. And honestly, I wanted it to. She asked if she could call or text me. I told her yes, but not to expect quick replies. I gave her almost the same ultimatum I gave my Momex. I added that the chances of us ever being together again were extremely low. She said she understood. The last person I spoke to was my stepbrother. I thanked him for everything he had done. He had even helped my mom pack her things to leave my stepfather's house. He apologized for everything and said he was planning to tell the rest of the family the truth. I have no contact with them, and I don't think I ever will except for my stepfather's grandmother. She's the oldest in the family and was the only one who still sent me birthday and Christmas wishes last year. Maybe she's just old enough not to care about the drama, or maybe she felt sorry for me. Either way, I've decided I'll reach out to her. Strange as it sounds, I'm flying home for my uncle's 60th birthday in the first week of March. It'll be my first time back since I left. I definitely plan to meet my stepbrother, and I wouldn't mind seeing my mom and my ex, but I've made it clear I need time to heal. If anything new happens, I'll update again. Maybe after this trip. Brief update. I got a call from a number in my home state. I answered. It was my stepfather. He said, "Hey." I immediately hung up and blocked the number. Then, I called my mom, my ex, and my stepbrother just to make sure they were all safe and nowhere near him. My mom was in a hotel he didn't know about. My ex and stepbrother were at their own places. My stepfather had never been a physically aggressive man, but it was better to be safe than sorry. My stepbrother told me his dad had called him that morning after coming home and finding my mom gone. My stepbrother didn't answer. Instead, he later told my stepfather everything, how we all knew the truth now, and that he should not try to contact any of us. I don't know how long he sat with that information before acting, but around 3 p.m. Pacific time, he called me. An hour later, I got a message from a different number. "We need to talk." I'm pretty sure it was him. I didn't respond. Brief update. Number 2. My stepfather's mother called me. I had her number saved. For a second, I thought it might be him again, but it wasn't. She was incredibly kind, far kinder than she had any reason to be. She wished me well, apologized on behalf of the family, and expressed genuine compassion. I thanked her and wished her the best too. It still amazes me that a woman like her raised a man like my stepfather. Update. It's been a month. Sorry for the delay. I've been busy with work and just got back home last weekend. I had spent weeks debating whether to respond to that message. Turns out, it was from my stepfather. Curiosity got the better of me. I called him. And yes, I did what some people suggested. I recorded the conversation. I wish I could say the call gave me some sort of closure. It didn't. Hearing his voice made my skin crawl. The first thing he said was, "How have you been?" I cut him off. "Cut the bullshit." He just laughed. Of course, he didn't say anything incriminating. He wasn't that stupid. But I did ask him the one question that had been eating at me. Why couldn't you just accept that she and I were together? His response? You were never man enough for her. A woman like that would have been wasted on you. His view on relationships had always been painfully traditional funny, considering he never understood me, my ex, or our dynamic. Without getting into too much detail, my ex had never been the type to conform to gender norms. She had a high-paying career and had always said she could never be a stay-at-home wife. She took initiative in many aspects of our relationship. So his answer? It was ridiculous. There was nothing to take from that call. I still don't know what he wanted. Before he could say anything else, I told him never to call me again and hung up. My trip back home. Last week, I flew back from my uncle's birthday party. My family welcomed me with open arms, expressing regret for not supporting me back then. None of them had ever been cruel to me. I don't hold anything against them. I spent some time with my stepbrother. We planned a small get-together at his place with my mom and my ex. Wednesday evening, I went over. And I got exactly what I expected. A lot of tears. A lot of apologies. I struggled to keep myself together. I spoke to each of them individually. My mom had already filed for divorce. Good. I was grateful for that. Our conversation went well. Our relationship is still tense, but I think we're moving towards something that resembles healing. My stepbrother apologized again, and I accepted it. He clearly carries a lot of guilt over everything that happened, but I don't blame him for any of it. Then, there was my ex. We talked all night. We had already been speaking over the phone for a few weeks, but in person, it felt different. Most of the conversation was just catching up. After a year and a half, we had both changed. Then, we moved on to the serious stuff: what had happened, how awful it had been, how much it had broken me. She told me she had been seeing a therapist and asked if I would be willing to go to a session with her on Thursday. In the past week, she has done more for me than I could have ever asked for. And for that, I am truly grateful. I went to therapy with her. And honestly, I think it was beneficial for both of us. After the session, we talked for a while, and I asked if she wanted to go out on Saturday night. That's the plan for now. I don't know where this will lead, but I wanted her to know I appreciate the effort she's making to try and fix what was broken. For now, that's all. Things are getting better. I haven't seen my stepfather or his family since coming home. Thanks to everyone for the support. If anything new happens, I'll be sure to update. Update number 3. The date went really well. We had a great evening, went out for dinner, played some arcade games. We used to do that a lot back in the day. It was my first date in almost a year and a half, and I genuinely enjoyed every second of it. Afterward, we went back to her place and talked for a while longer. This week, before I go back to California, we'll sit down and figure out what comes next. The distance will be the hardest part, but I think it'll help us keep a clear perspective if we're not constantly around each other. Thanks again to everyone for the support. Update number 4. A lot of people have been asking for the next update, so here it is. I've been in regular contact with my mom. We're rebuilding our relationship, and there's definitely progress. I'm honestly glad she's back in my life, even if it'll take time for things to fully heal. As for my ex, I had long conversations about what to do next. She flew out to spend some time with me, which was really nice. At the moment, we aren't back together, and I think that's the right call. As for my former stepfather, I have no clue what's going on with him. He tried reaching out to my mom a few times after everything, but he never managed to talk to her. He hasn't tried to contact me again, and honestly, good. I hope I never see him again. Life has changed. I ended up moving again for a new job. Now, I'm a few states away from my family, and I think that's best for everyone. Thank you all for the support throughout this insane story. Thank you all for your attention. Let me know in the comments what you think about my stepfather's actions. Personally, I think he made a huge mistake, not just because of what he did, but because he didn't even consult his own son, who wasn't even interested in my ex in the first place. My mom turning her back on her own son was honestly baffling. And my fiancé? She could have at least checked the proof I was offering before believing a stranger.